Are you new to nostalgixtcg, or maybe even an existing player but kind of stuck on deck building or don't really know where to go, how to do a deck, and just need a little bit of like a creative push? Then you're in the right place, because today I am starting a brand new series here on my channel, Ren's Collectibles, called Deck Tech. So as the name implies, I'm sure if you've played any other TCG, you already know, we are going to take decks, we're going to break them down to the simplest form and explain the cards in them and why we picked them, and maybe even go over some cards that might be good to upgrade or evolve your deck. So stick around and let's get into this video. Today's deck is the very first nostalgixtcg deck that I ever built. My very first time going to the game shop, sitting down and trying to construct anything outside the starter decks. And I kind of wanted to show it with you guys because it's not the greatest deck in the world, but it does win and it's a lot of fun. And I really wanted to kind of give, like, I guess, an easier deck to break down and show you guys to start it off, because this is a deck that you guys can start building and creating all on your own right away. All right, so the deck that I'm actually talking about is my Voodoll Deathtouch deck. So here's a quick glimpse at some of the cards there. I know you can't really tell anything on them, but we are going to break this down. So starting off, as I just ate my microphone, let me move that over a little bit. So starting off, we have the hero card right here, Evelyn. Now, hero cards, as you guys know or may not know, this is a key staple of your deck, as this is a card that indicates your total health, your life, where you start and where you are. So one of the ways to win a game is to knock your opponent's hero's life down to 0. So these are important because these have your life on them. The second piece is they all have different abilities, and I don't know if you guys can see that good or not. I'm going to put it up here. I'll likely put the card digitally on here as well. But it says once per turn, you may pay 1 mana to give any fighter a +1 attack counter. Now, this is important because of the pieces I have in my deck will utilize that counter. And that's part of the strategy of this Deathtouch deck. But if you're just building a deck and you just like to get that extra +1 power to smash some things, this is a very good hero because it works for just about every fighter. But the main fighters that I am talking about here are none other than Voodoll. So Voodoll is the Deathtouch lovable character, the mascot of Nostalgix. I know a lot of you guys have been seeing Voodoll, the plushies, which are adorable, by the way. This is like the main theme that started this deck. So whenever I do deck building and I'm looking into creating a new deck, my very first thought is, what do I want to be the centerpiece of my deck? What do I want to build the deck around? And for this deck in particular here, it was Deathtouch. So Voodoll has its character type right there, which is a demon, and its ability right next to it, which is Deathtouch. If this deals damage to a fighter, destroy it. It being the enemy fighter, the opposing fighter. You'll notice, though, as a mistake I made my very first time playing with this deck too, is that his attack has a 0, which means if you use pins and needles, he's got no damage, so it's technically not doing it's not dealing damage to anything. It can't kill it all on its own. So as you can see, it's a 1 cost, which is really cheap. Turn 1, you can play this bad boy, but it can't do anything. And that's where Evelyn comes in to give it the +1 attack counter. Now you do have to pay a mana to get that, but it gives Voodoll +1. So when it attacks, it's dealing 1 damage, and that is all it needs to do in order to activate its Deathtouch ability. Now the second fighter in here is Voodoll's evolved form, Scarepin, which also has Deathtouch, same thing, but its Eternal Embrace already has damage onto it, so you don't really need it. Once you get it to a Scarepin, you don't really need it to have any kind of counters or anything like that. The Deathtouch here on its own will do the trick. The other fighters, because as you kind of go through a deck, you need to have kind of a couple different things. You could just center it all around Deathtouch and be completely fine. There's actually one other character that I can think of off the top of my head that has Deathtouch in the deck, but it's an evolved fighter and it's a little more difficult to get out and play. So if I wanted a true Deathtouch deck, I would probably make it that way. But given that this deck was centered around Deathtouch, but it's not exclusive to Deathtouch, we must move into the next fighter, which is Succubi. Now, Succubi, I chose for a couple different things. One, I love the Lilith line, the Succubi line. So Succubi evolves into Morriga, Morriga evolves into Lilith. But really, the couple big keys here for me when constructing this deck was Succubi is a 3 cost, which means it can be played relatively early on, and has 6 health. So it's a little bit of a tank when it comes to basic form fighters. But its attack does 2 damage, and your opponent discards a card from their hand when the attack lands. That's an easy pick for me. The ability is really good. The cost is good. The health is good. This is overall a really well balanced fighter, and just sticking with the whole theme of Deathtouch and kind of like the creepy, scary type of deck. Even this one goes really good, so we had to include her into it. And of course, we're going to continue on here with Morriga, the evolved form of Succubi, as it says above the name. And it has an ability that when this is played, bind 1 enemy fighter. So another thing that helps play into the Deathtouch thing is if you've got a Voodoll out there and you need to have it attack something, there's going to be a lot of, when your opponent is pulling you, they're going to do whatever they can to stop Voodoll. They're going to put things in place. They're going to try to block it. They're going to try to do whatever they can to get Voodoll to become ineffective, because that's the whole point of the deck. This lets you bind fighters. So if you've got something out there that's creating tokens or essentially becoming a wall, you can bind it. It's no good. It's still there, but it becomes a sitting duck. Voodoll can, do its little Deathtouch, and that's it. But it's a 7 cost, so it's a little bit higher up there. You won't be able to get it till a little bit later on in the game unless you have other cards, which I'll show you in this deck. But it has 12 life, which is phenomenal, and its burn back is an attack that does 7 damage, plus your opponent discards a card from their hand for each bound fighter they control. So you bind multiple fighters, you get to them, you could probably run their hand out, which really binds an opponent. And then we have 1 Lilith in this deck as well, because it's already hard enough to get to Morriga. Lilith is very difficult to get on the field of play going through the evolving method, just because it is a 10 cost. It's a late stage play here, and you have to have your Morriga, Succubi, all of them survive long enough to get Lilith out there. It becomes difficult. Not impossible. I have summoned Lilith and evolved her into a Morriga before, or from Morriga before, so it is possible. But same thing when this is played, bind 2 enemy fighters, and then Hellfire Revenge does 11 damage, and it discards 2 cards from your opponent's hands for each bound fighter they control. It's pretty powerful. 18 life, yeah. You get Lilith out there, you are doing pretty good. Next fighter up, we have Souljar. Now, I mostly pick Souljar to stick with the theme of the deck. As you notice, we've got nothing but demons in this deck, and while this is not a demon, it's a spirit, so it's kind of like that creepy Halloween type fighter here, so I picked it. But honestly, I really like Souljar. So it has its ability that whenever a friendly fighter is damaged, give this +1 health, which means it can go up above its maximum printed cost here of 5, but its attack does deal any non-fatal damage to this fighter, and then deal that equal amount of damage to any other fighter or hero. So it's kind of a little give and take, and if you've got fighters that can take a couple hits like Morriga or Succubi, then that's a pretty decent fighter to have out there. Now, Rowlet. I have 2 Rowlet in this deck, and simply for the mana draw here. Now, Rowlet is a 1 cost with 1 life, meaning it is very weak. chances are they're not going to survive on the battlefield. But if you have, your opponent doesn't have any fighters up, or if you've got like a decent token wall or something that people have to get through before they can touch fighters, playing these are pretty good because when it attacks, it gets +1 health, meaning its health goes up each turn. It can go over the printed cost, and then its ability is during your turn you may sacrifice this fighter. If you do, gain mana equal to this fighter's health until the end of turn. So it's good like one-time use mana for 1 turn. So you get a Rowlet up 3 or 4 health, and you evolve your Morriga, your Succubi into Morriga, but then you need 4 extra mana to evolve into Lilith, and there you go, you got it. And it makes it a little bit easier to get to some of the stages. But the last 2 fighters we have are BB. Again, a really low cost fighter with some pretty low health, but we really only want it for its ability in this deck, which are spells and surprises you cast deal +1 more damage, and the effect is stackable. So if you get both of these BBs out into play, surprises and spells that deal damage will now suddenly deal 2 more damage on top of it. And then speaking of, we have these cards here, which are Sparkbolt 0 cost cards. These are free to play, deal 1 damage to anything. You got 4 of them in the deck. If you got 2 BBs out, you play 1 card, that's 3 damage it's dealing to anything. And if you have 3 or 4 of them in your hand, your opponent has a nice little field of fighters out there, you could pretty much take anything out with these. And then same with the next couple cards here. We have Pins and Needles. So Pins and Needles says deal 2 damage to anything. You've got 2 BBs out there, you're dealing 2 damage. Now all of a sudden you're dealing 4 damage because of the stackable ability of BB. So again, these are 1 cost, so you do have to pay a mana for it, but you got nothing else to do. You got 1 extra mana, you need a fighter taken out. One of these could potentially do 4 damage to anything. Or if you just, want to hit their hero because you're getting close to winning the game or whatever, they're pretty good cards to have, especially when they are stacked with BB's ability. The next card up here is Soul Jar Dice. Now, this is one of my favorite cards in the entire game. I have them in pretty much every single deck because it's really good damage. I want to say it's free damage, but it's not free damage, but it is really good. So for a 5 cost, relatively low for a spell, you roll a d10, deal that much damage to up to 2, yeah, it says 2 up to, that is kind of strange. Deals that much damage up to 2 enemy fighters, so you're getting a little bit behind on the chains there. You got a BB out, or maybe you play a BB or 2, and then you slap one of these down. You just hope for a high roll. You get that +1 stackable damage on top of whatever you roll from the d10. Boom, you're back in this game, baby. Same thing here with Towerfall. Now these are good cards to have. Deal damage equal to your opponent's hand size to all of their fighters. The only thing, and it's going to seem kind of counterintuitive to this deck, I have these in here just in case you can't get Succubi and Morriga and Lilith going and you don't get your opponent's hand to be discarded, then this is a great play because it takes however many cards your opponent has in their hand and deals that much damage to all of their fighters. Then you get to draw 2 cards. So at the very minimum, you get to draw 2 cards. If you've got like a couple Succubi or a Morriga or something out there and you're discarding your opponent's hand left and right, don't play that thinking you're going to deal a lot of damage to a fighter, because you're not going to unless they still somehow have a massive hand. What? It could happen. It could happen. All right, next up we have Chains of the Deep. So deal 2 damage to any fighter and bind it. So 2 things here. You're dealing 2 damage. You have the 2 BBs out. Now all of a sudden they're dealing 3 damage each. Plus you can bind a fighter. You combine this with the Succubi, Morriga, Lilith, and that activates those abilities to discard cards even faster. So kind of a 2-in-1 combo right there if you can play it right. It doesn't always happen that way, but Tunnel of Vines. Now this is one that I might take I might take some other cards out of the deck and add them into here. And that's a way, you know, throughout this whole deck tutorial thing, this deck tech here, there are plenty of options that you can throw into this deck or take out of this deck to make it even better. That's kind of the beauty with all decks in every TCG, is that you can upgrade them numerous amounts of ways, and there's no right or wrong way to do it. But some of the next cards I'm going to be showing, I might even take out of here for a couple more of these. But Tunnel of Vines is a 4 cost to bind all enemy fighters. Again, this can save a Voodoll from being destroyed because they're pretty weak. Can save a Rowlet from being destroyed. Can save any of your fighters from being destroyed because you're binding all the enemy fighters, which means they cannot attack their next turn. But if you have Succubi, Lilith, Morga, any of them out, then it does that effect as well for discarding cards. Now, when you're using Evelyn, it's going to be better, more beneficial to use the pay 1 mana to get the 1 attack token. But there comes a time where if you have some surprises in play, you can attach the Magician's Bag as an equipment onto a fighter, say Voodoll, to where you don't have to continue spending 1 mana every turn to get your +1 attack, because this says you gain +1 attack for each surprise you have in play. So you attach these to your Voodoll, you have at least 1 surprise in play. There you go. That's your free attack token. You don't have to worry about spending your mana, as long as your Voodoll lives and the equipment's still attached to him. You don't have to worry about paying that mana, which can kind of ease up some of that if you're being mana starved a little bit. Next up, Super Massive Slingshot. So this is kind of a cool card. I have these in a lot of my decks just because it gives this fighter it's attached to and the fighter directly to its left charge. And if you don't know, charge means it can attack right away. There's no summoning sickness. Now, if you attach this to a hero, give +2 attack instead. So the only thing with giving it to a hero is equipment on heroes is destroyed if the hero is damaged by an attack. So it's better off just being attached to fighters in this deck, in this case. There's always differences per decks, but here we are going to get into some of the surprises here. Now we have some of the staples, 3 reverses, and again, another area to upgrade in the deck if you potentially want to. If you find that your opponent is playing a lot more surprises than you can counter, you might want to add another reverse in here. Because these negate a surprise's activation. The player who owned that surprise draws a card. Then we also have 2 nopes in here. Again, if you're playing somebody who's got a spell-heavy deck, then you probably want to put a couple more nopes in here as surprises. Or if you just really want to pimp out the Magician's Bag and you really want to go ham on some damage, then you want more surprises. These are good ones to go to. These are the staples. But the last 3 cards, we're getting to the very end here, ladies and gentlemen. Proving Grounds. Now, this is a stadium card, an arena. Excuse me, it's an arena. Every time I teach somebody the game, I have to tell them it's comparable to a stadium in Pokemon. But it's an arena. And the effect is each player's fighters may evolve into any leveled up version of themselves directly without needing to follow the chain of evolution. This is in here because of Lilith. Again, it's very difficult to get Lilith onto the battlefield. You might want all the help you can get, and this certainly helps you get there. You slap this down, and then your next turn, if you have enough mana, you can just evolve a Succubi straight into Lilith. So it's a pretty good card if you think that you can get it out there long enough and keep it as a staple. And the very last card here, just in case all things are going wrong for you, you've got somebody like Destructa, who you're going up against, that is just absolutely dominating you with their ability, then play the Nullifying Void. Just do it. It's better off this way. Neither player's fighter or hero abilities can be used, and all abilities of fighters in play are negated. So basically, everything becomes null and void except for direct damage dealt by a fighter. So when you got Voodoll up here, if you have a +1 counter on it, and you hit it for 1 damage, its ability, Deathtouch, is negated, which means it will no longer have Deathtouch to kill something on 1 hit. You actually have to deal a fatal amount of damage to kill it. Same with Succubi here. says, well, actually, it's not Succubi, it's Morriga. When this is played, bind one enemy fighter. It can't do that because its ability is gone. That is the rough roundabout way of this deck here. My very first deck tech tutorial, and the very first deck that I ever created for Nostalgix myself, right here in the palm of your hands. If you like this deck, feel free to just build it and play. It's a lot of fun to play with. Like, seriously, it's a very good deck. I've won a lot of games with it, but it is beatable. I am a firm believer of every deck is beatable. You just have to have the right cards and know how to play them in order to beat a deck. And this is no different. You just need to know how to beat this deck. And like, if you know the mechanics, like the Voodoll, you stop the Voodoll in its tracks, and then you prevent Succubi from coming out. You can slow somebody down enough to where this deck becomes kind of ineffective. But also knowing that your opponent might have these counters allows you to build your sideboard a little bit better, which I'm not going to really go into because a sideboard can be anything, and it all will change and vary depending on who you're playing and what kind of deck they're playing. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this very first deck tech of nostalgixtcg. Please smash that thumbs up button, that like button, if you guys enjoy the content and you want to see some more deck techs. I love building decks. I really, really do. And I've got a ton more decks that I already have, and plenty more are in the works. So if you guys want to continue to see more deck techs, please, please, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It also doesn't hurt to drop a comment down below that, you know, whatever your thoughts are on it, whether you liked it, you didn't like it, you thought the deck was stupid. I don't care. Just say whatever you want down there. You know, I'll respond to it. Constructive criticism is always useful. So feel free to drop it for me if you have it, or if you end up actually building this deck and playing, let me know what you think of it. That goes a long way for me too. But that is all the time we have for today, ladies and gentlemen. I hope to see you guys in the future for more of these deck tech videos. I'm out. See you guys.